It's a family gathering, and Jade, dressed in a server's uniform, is humiliated by her cousin Cody. He laughs as he deliberately spills red wine on her, with Aunt Angela watching from the corner, smirking. They think Jade is just the hired help, but what they don't know is that Jade is secretly the CEO who signed Cody's employment contract just 6 days ago. She's not crying or running away. She's about to enforce a clause in his contract that's going to cost him everything. Imagine the consequences of that glass of wine. Trust me, it's going to shock you. Drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from and what time it is. I'm curious to see who's ready for some justice. Jade stood in the guest bathroom, her mind steady, her eyes locked on her reflection in the mirror. The wine stain on her shirt was a badge of their cruelty, but it didn't bother her. In fact, it almost made her feel stronger. They had no idea who she really was. To them, she was just Jade, the family failure, the servant who always cleaned up their mess. But in this moment, in this room, Jade was someone else entirely. Her fingers brushed the edges of her hair, pulling it back into a tight ponytail as she took a deep breath. She wasn't just a logistics manager, she was the secret CEO of Aegis Transport, the woman who made deals that moved millions and kept some of the world's most valuable items safe and secure. And tonight, she was going to remind them just how powerful she really was. But she couldn't act too soon. Patience was her weapon, and she needed every second she could get to set everything in motion. Her thoughts lingered on Cody's careless actions, the wine, the slurs, the public humiliation. They hadn't just crossed a line, they had walked straight over it, but Jade didn't flinch. Instead, she took out her phone, her hands calm and steady. There was no panic, no rush. She knew exactly what she was doing. She opened the Nest security app, knowing exactly where to look. Just 5 minutes earlier, the footage had been taken. She scrolled through it, watching Cody laugh, his glass tilting as the red liquid poured onto her uniform. The sound of his laughter, the way it rang in her ears, it wasn't just disrespect, it was an opportunity. She hit download, securing the evidence with a deliberate calmness. The file went straight to her personal cloud, then another copy was sent to her lawyer's encrypted server. She had what she needed, and now it was time to build. The next move wasn't complicated, just a few clicks. She opened her company's HR portal effortlessly, bypassing the standard login screen with her biometric security. She had access to everything: personnel files, contracts, and compensation details. She didn't need to search for Cody's file, it was exactly where she'd expected it to be. Active probationary status. She clicked through, scanning his contract with practiced ease. And there it was, the signing bonus. $20,000. But it wasn't a gift. It was a forgivable loan. It would only be forgiven if Cody worked for 12 months without incident. If he was terminated for cause, the loan would be due in full. Jade's fingers hovered over the terminate button. The temptation was strong. She could do it right now. She could march out there and expose everything. But then she would just be another angry person, another upset family member. It would look like a meltdown. It would look like a tantrum. And worst of all, it wouldn't work. Not the way she needed it to. She needed to make sure Cody couldn't just pay this off, couldn't wiggle his way out of it. No, she wasn't going to let him off the hook that easily. Instead, she stayed quiet. She swallowed. The insult took the sting and wore it like armor. Every minute she stayed in that uniform, every glass she refilled, every cruel word she swallowed, it was all part of the plan. It wasn't weakness. It was an investment strategy. Every second was compounding interest on his debt. Jade knew something her relatives didn't. Revenge wasn't about anger. Anger was easy. Anger was reactive. No, revenge was about strategy. It was about waiting, watching, and using every bit of information to your advantage. Her silence wasn't submission. It was the patience of someone who knew they were playing a bigger game. And every moment she spent as the hired help was another moment Cody dug himself deeper into a hole. She practiced her smile in the mirror, though it didn't reach her eyes. It didn't need to. The smile wasn't for her, it was for them. It needed to look submissive enough to buy her more time. The mask was working. She unlocked the door and stepped back into the chaos, the clink of her heels against the tile almost soundless. She walked back into the lion's den, and Angela snapped her fingers at her, summoning her like a servant. Jade didn't respond. She just poured the champagne without spilling a drop, her hands steady. Angela didn't even glance at her. The conversation continued and Jade stayed silent, pouring the drinks, swallowing the insults. Angela talked about how proud she was of Cody, how he had such a bright future ahead. The words stung, but Jade wasn't here to argue. She was here to make sure that Cody didn't have a future. Every word Angela spoke about him, every time she brushed off Jade, it only fueled her determination. She wasn't just the help. She was the one who had built an empire. She was the one who had started from nothing. No family support, no handouts. Just grit, quiet, precision, and a vision for the future. And Cody had no idea what that kind of work looked like. He had no idea how hard it was to build something that would last. As Jade stood there refilling glass after glass, she realized one thing. She wasn't just going to take his job. She was going to take his future. And when it all came crashing down, there wouldn't be any way for him to crawl out of it. Not this time. Jade stood quietly in the bathroom, the cool air against her skin, a sharp contrast to the heat of the wine soaking through her shirt. She wasn't angry. Anger was too cheap for what she had planned. Instead, there was a calmness about her, a sense of clarity. She watched herself in the mirror, her reflection, showing a woman who had been underestimated. A woman who had lived a life of quiet observation, and now she was going to use every bit of that to her advantage. It was almost laughable how little they knew. To them, Jade was nothing more than a servant, someone to pour drinks, clean up messes, and stay invisible. But they had no idea who she really was. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, pulling her out of her thoughts. It was time to move. Slowly, she pulled the phone out her fingers, tapping the screen with purpose. She opened the Nest security app without a second thought, her eyes scanning the footage. She didn't need to look for long. It was all there in the small, quiet moment from just minutes ago. Cody laughing the wine, sloshing in his glass as he tilted it toward her, deliberately, spilling it down her shirt. The evidence was crystal clear. Jade knew this wasn't just a random act of disrespect. It was a calculated move, a test to see how much she would take before breaking. But she wasn't going to break. Not now, not ever. She hit download and saved the file to her personal cloud. Just a few clicks more and the file was securely sent to her lawyer's encrypted server. The first piece of her strategy was locked in place. Jade didn't rush. There was no need to hurry. The next step was just as deliberate. She opened the HR portal, her access granted by a simple retina scan. It was seamless, easy even, but it wasn't just the tech that made it effortless, it was her. She was the one who built this system, the one who put in the long hours to make sure every corner was covered. She scrolled through the dashboard, bypassing the mundane tasks that could have distracted her and heading straight to what she needed: Cody's personnel file. His status was right where she expected it to be: active probationary. The file practically screamed opportunity. Jade knew exactly what she was looking for: the contract. She clicked through her fingers, gliding over the screen as she found the section that caught her attention. The signing bonus, $20,000, a significant sum. But it wasn't a gift, it was a loan, and that was the key. A forgivable loan, of course, but only if he completed 12 months of continuous service. If he was terminated for cause, if he messed up, he would owe the full amount immediately. It was the perfect trap. She could fire him right now. She could click terminate and have him out the door. But that wouldn't be enough. No, she needed more. She needed him to spend that money to dig himself into a hole so deep he couldn't climb out. She studied the contract again, her eyes scanning the fine print. It was as if the document itself was a blueprint for what she needed to do. She hovered her thumb over the button to end his employment, and for a split second, she considered it. The satisfaction of seeing his world crumble right then and there was tempting. But that wouldn't be the smart move. Revenge wasn't about instant gratification. It wasn't about making a dramatic exit. It was about strategy, patience. Jade understood business contracts better than anyone. She knew how to negotiate, how to play the long game. That's what she was doing now. She wasn't just going to fire him and let him walk away with his bonus. No, she would let him spend it. Let him burn through every cent of it, so by the time it was due, he would have nothing left to pay. It wasn't just his job at risk, it was his future. He thought he had won, but Jade wasn't playing that game. She had the patience to wait. She closed the portal, and for a moment she allowed herself to reflect on how far she'd come. She wasn't the Jade they saw, the one who had been conditioned to believe that money was the price of admission to this family. No, she was something else. She was a woman who had built an empire from nothing, and now she was using every tool at her disposal to ensure her success. She wasn't going to let her cousin's careless arrogance spoil that. Not when she had spent years building a logistics company that moved millions of dollars worth of assets every year. It wasn't about the money, it was about control. Jade had taken control of this moment, and soon she would take control of Cody's future. She wasn't just taking his job, she was taking everything from him. Every word he had ever said, every insult he had thrown her way would come back to haunt him. The door opened, and she stepped back into the chaos of the villa. Aunt Angela snapped her fingers at her from across the room, her tone dismissive as always, but Jade didn't react. She didn't need to. She knew what she had to do, and she was going to make sure it happened. Every insult, every cruel gesture would only add to the interest on Cody's debt. Jade wasn't just watching him dig his own hole, she was handing him the shovel. Slowly, with precision, she would wait until the time was right. She would make sure he had nothing left when the bill came due. And when that moment arrived, he would realize just how deeply he had underestimated her. But by then, it would be too late. Jade stood in the library, her back straight, her gaze calm but sharp. The room smelled like old wood and leather, a stark contrast to the chaos that had unfolded just outside. and Angela marched in first, her heels clicking loudly against the stone floor. She was furious, her face twisted in anger as she pulled Cody behind her. Jade could hear Angela's breath catching in her throat, the sharp inhale as she approached. "This better be good, Jade," Angela hissed, her tone dripping with disdain. "You ruined everything. You embarrassed us." There it was, the arrogance, the dismissal. Angela wasn't even concerned about the situation itself. She was concerned with how her image had been tarnished. To her, everything was about appearances. But Jade wasn't here to cater to her aunt's vanity. She was here to set the record straight. As Angela's words fell on deaf ears, Jade remained composed, her eyes unwavering. Her pulse didn't quicken. There was no sign of distress on her face. If anything, there was a faint glimmer of satisfaction hidden beneath her cool exterior. "Sit down," Jade said, her voice quiet but unyielding. It wasn't a request, it was a command. Angela blinked in surprise. She hesitated for a second, not used to being spoken to this way, but the power behind Jade's words left her no choice. Angela lowered herself into the chair, a confused frown spreading across her face. Cody, still swaying slightly from the alcohol, took a seat beside her, rubbing his face as if trying to push through the haze of drunkenness. His nervous laugh escaped as he muttered, "Come on, Jade, it's all good. I was just joking earlier. Don't be so sensitive." But there was no humor in his words. There was fear. Fear that he didn't yet understand the depth of the hole he had dug for himself. "Sit down," Jade repeated, her voice unflinching. This time there was no hesitation. Angela and Cody sat, their confusion palpable. Jade knew they were both trying to process the change in atmosphere, the shift that had started the moment she walked into the room. For the first time, they were the ones on the defensive. For the first time, they didn't control the narrative. But they still had no idea what was coming. Jade let them stew in the silence for a moment before the doorbell rang. Angela shot Jade a glance, her irritation rising. Jade didn't even look at the door. She didn't need to. She had already arranged for everything. She knew exactly how this would unfold. A moment later, the heavy doors swung open and a man walked in. He wasn't familiar to Angela or Cody, but Jade knew him well. Arthur Sterling. He wasn't just a lawyer. He was a corporate litigator, the kind who didn't blink when it came to destroying contracts, demolishing reputations, and winning cases that seemed impossible. Arthur walked into the room with his leather briefcase in hand, his expression grave and professional. He wasn't here for small talk. He wasn't here to negotiate. He was here to witness the end. Angela's eyes widened as she took in his presence, her anger turning to confusion. "Who is this?" she demanded, standing abruptly. "Who let you in?" But Jade remained seated. She didn't flinch. She didn't answer. She didn't need to. Arthur wasn't here for introductions. "Mr. Sterling is my personal counsel," Jade said, calmly, her voice cutting through the tension. "And he's here to witness the termination of employment for Mr. Cody Vance." The words hit like a slap. Cody froze, his face draining of color as the realization hit him. His eyes flickered to Jade, then back to Arthur, then back to Jade. He opened his mouth to say something, but the words didn't come out. He looked like a man who had just realized the depth of his own stupidity. "What?" Cody stammered. "You can't fire me. I don't work for you. I work for Aegis Transport." His voice cracked slightly, his bravado crumbling under the weight of Jade's calm presence. Jade didn't blink. She didn't even move. She just watched as the truth settled in. "I am Aegis Transport," She said, her voice smooth and even the words carrying the weight of undeniable authority. There was no arrogance, no anger, just a calm, collected statement of fact. Angela opened her mouth to speak, but the words stuck in her throat. Jade was no longer the person they had assumed her to be. The world they had built in their minds was collapsing, and they couldn't do anything to stop it. I founded Aegis 5 years ago. Jade continued, her eyes steady. I own 100%. I approved your hire, Cody. I signed your contract. It was a truth that they couldn't deny. A truth that up until now had been hidden beneath layers of assumption and condescension. But it was out in the open now, and the room felt colder, heavier as the weight of it settled over them. Cody's face went pale. Liar. Angela hissed, her voice shaking. She stood, her hands trembling with fury, but Jade didn't move. She didn't flinch. She was in control, and she knew it. Not a liar, Jade replied evenly, her eyes never leaving Cody. She reached for her iPad and unlocked it with a single fluid motion. She tapped the screen, bringing up the footage from earlier, the footage of Cody pouring the wine on her, laughing as it splashed against her shirt. She didn't need to say anything more. She just let the video play, letting it speak for itself. Cody's face twisted with panic as the footage played, the humiliation washing over him in waves. Angela's eyes darted between Jade and the screen, and the air in the room seemed to tighten with every passing second. This qualifies as gross misconduct under your contract, Jade said quietly. Harassment, reputational damage, the terms are clear. She looked at Arthur, who slid a paper across the table. Immediate termination for cause. He said, his voice low but final. It wasn't just a termination. It was the end of Cody's chance at redemption, the end of his career. And in that moment, Jade could see it in his eyes, the realization, the crushing weight of the mistake he had made. The trap had been set, and now it was snapping shut. The tension in the room thickened as Angela sat frozen, her eyes glued to the screen, showing Cody's disgrace. She didn't speak at first, but the wheels in her mind were turning rapidly. Then, without warning, she reached into her purse and pulled out a folded document, placing it on the table in front of Jade. The paper crackled in the silence, as if it too was aware of the weight it carried. Angela leaned in, her voice low and dangerous. "You're not firing him," she hissed, her eyes narrowing. "And you're not getting that money back." Jade didn't move, didn't flinch. She just stared at the document, the weight of Angela's threat settling over her like a cloud. Angela's smile was tight-forced. "Or what?" Jade asked, her voice calm, almost casual. Angela didn't respond right away. She leaned back in her chair, her fingers tapping the document. "Or," she began, "I stopped paying this." She pointed to the paper, the sharp edge of her words slicing through the room. Jade's eyes flickered to the paper, her mind instantly processing the situation. It wasn't just a piece of paper, it was a weapon, and Angela was trying to use it against her. The loan document in front of her was no ordinary loan. It was a predatory $50,000 loan one Angela had taken out for the party and for Cody's debts. But that wasn't the worst part. Angela had needed a co-signer. And who better than the trustworthy family member who had paid for everything so far? The loan was forged. Angela had forged Jade's signature to make herself the co-signer. Jade felt her pulse steady, her resolve hardening. This was the moment she had been waiting for. Angela's grin widened as she watched Jade's face. She knew she had struck a blow, that she had cornered her. But what Angela didn't realize was that Jade had already anticipated this move. Every step Every trap Angela had set had been carefully accounted for. "You don't scare me," Jade said, her voice still calm, though now there was a sharp edge to it. Angela's smile faltered slightly, but she pressed on. "If you don't keep Cody employed, if you don't forgive the bonus, and if you don't pay the loan, they'll come after you." Angela spat. "You'll credit your company, they'll be ruined. You'll lose everything." For a moment, Angela seemed to savor the victory, her words hanging in the air, thick with threats. But Jade wasn't fazed. She remained still, her eyes unwavering. She reached forward, sliding the document toward her. As her fingers touched it, a subtle smirk tugged at the corners of her mouth. "I've seen your game," Jade said, her tone colder now. "You think this is leverage, but it's just a confession." Angela's eyes widened. She looked at Jade, confusion flitting across her face. Jade didn't wait for the reaction. She picked up her phone and casually slid it across the table. Angela's hand shot out to grab it, her fingers trembling as she looked at the screen. "Critical alert, fraud attempt detected." The message read, "Location confirmed, device tagged." The message wasn't for her, it was for Angela. Jade had already set the trap, had already alerted the authorities. The phone had been tracking Angela's every move since the moment she had forged that signature. Angela's face drained of color. She looked up at Jade, her mouth working, but no words came out. This wasn't the response she had expected. She had thought she had won. She had thought she could manipulate Jade, corner her into a situation where she had no choice but to comply. But Jade was 10 steps ahead. She didn't need to rely on threats. She didn't need to stoop to the same level as Angela. All Jade needed was her intelligence, her patience, and the quiet knowledge that everything she had done, every decision, every move, was perfectly calculated. Angela looked down at the phone again, her hand shaking. "You called them?" she whispered, her voice cracking. Jade's gaze never wavered. "No," she replied, her voice calm. "You did." She watched as the color drained from Angela's face, as the full realization hit her. The fraud alert was real. The authorities were already on their way. Angela's hands trembled as she pulled the document back, her grip tightening as if she could somehow force the situation back into her control. But there was no going back. It was too late. The lies were exposed. The trap had closed around her and there was no escape. Cody, still sitting beside Angela, had been silent through all of this, but now he looked at his mother, his face frozen with fear. "What do we do now?" He choked out his voice, barely above a whisper. Jade didn't look at him. She didn't need to. "You figure it out," she said softly, but her words were final. She wasn't there to fix their mess. She wasn't there to bail them out of their mistakes. "Like I had to," she added, her voice laced with finality. The door to the library creaked open just as Angela opened her mouth to respond. But this time, it wasn't her words that mattered. The officers who stepped through the door had all the power in the room. Angela didn't resist. She collapsed into her chair, her head bowed, her hands shaking uncontrollably. There was nothing left for her to say. She had lost. Jade felt a sense of calm settle over her as the officers moved in her business, intact, her future secure. And Cody, well, he was just starting to understand the gravity of what had just happened. The world he thought he knew was crumbling, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. As the officers escorted Angela from the villa, Jade stood there, her posture straight, her expression unreadable. The storm had passed, and the chaos that had once filled the air now felt distant, like a storm receding into the horizon. She had done it. She had played the long game, kept her cool, and let them dig their own hole. And now everything had fallen into place, just as she had planned. Cody, still stunned, sat frozen, his hands shaking as he stared at the floor. Jade didn't look at him. She didn't need to. He was a casualty of his own arrogance, a pawn who had thought he could get away with his actions without consequences. But Jade had made sure he would never forget what happened today. She wasn't just taking his job, she was taking his future. The silence in the room was deafening, but it was the kind of silence Jade had come to appreciate. It wasn't the emptiness of defeat, it was the quiet of a battle won. She had been underestimated by everyone in that room, but now the tables had turned. Angela and Cody had thought they could push her around, use her for their own gain, but they had made a fatal mistake. They had underestimated the power of patience, intelligence, and strategy. Jade's calm resolve had been her greatest weapon. She had seen their moves before they made them, predicted their every step, and turned their assumptions into the very trap that had closed around them. The silence lingered for a moment longer, then Jade turned and walked toward the door. She didn't need to say anything more. She had won. As she stepped out into the evening air, she felt a wave of relief wash over her. But it wasn't just relief, it was satisfaction. She had done what needed to be done, and now her future was secure. But this wasn't just about her, it was about justice. About making sure that those who think they can get away with cruelty and manipulation would eventually face the consequences. And just like that, Jade's story came to an end. But the lesson remained. Patience, intelligence, and the ability to play the long game could turn the tide in even the most dire of situations. If you enjoyed this story, make sure to like and subscribe for more tales of clever revenge and the sweet taste of justice. You don't want to miss what comes next.